Hi, everyone, and thanks a lot for tuning in for a new episode of Served. Today, we are starting a new series with founder stories, and I'm Peter Beck, the CEO and co-founder of Candler. And with me today, I have Simon Houston, the director and co-founder of Houston and Hawks, where we'll dive into your journey in contract catering, why you started Houston and Hawks, differentiation, etc. But maybe before we dive into all the exciting things, if you could give a little introduction to yourself, what is your story and why did you end up starting Houston and Hawks?
Yeah, quite a long subject. And so I grew up in hospitality. My dad worked in the sector quite a long time ago now, in the food service sector, mostly London, but abroad as well. So unlike many, when I left university, I knew about contract catering. I knew about the sector, which was a big advantage because, as you'll probably know, it's still a pretty unrepresented sector in many ways, certainly within universities. But so yeah, I went to when I finished school, I went to Oxford Brookes University. I did hotel restaurant management, and in my second year of university, it was a placement year, and I did that in a small company at the time called Baxter Smith. That's where I met Dave, my business partner. Actually, he was one of the ops managers, and I was doing my year sort of experience. And I had a pretty good 12, 13-month program there, everything from a bit of time in the kitchen right through to some management, bit of mobilization, bit around finance. So I had a really good, I guess, look into the sector, which I then wanted to join. After leaving university, I joined what then had become Baxter Story. And I had 7 really good years with Baxter Story, all in operations. So I did some time in Scotland, a few years up in Scotland. I spent some time in London and also got involved in the mobilization of Baxter Story Europe at the time, which was a a sort of very interesting, challenging, but rewarding experience in equal measure. And then I guess I wanted to move into a sales role because I think my longer term journey was always to set my own business up. I didn't have any timescales in that, but my longer term ambition was to do that, and definitely sales was a skill set I'd yet to develop and a role I'd yet to do. So I went to go and work for Bartlett Mitchell at the time as sales director. So joined there, about 10 years ago now. And I did 4.5 years with Bartlett Mitchell. I had 4.5 brilliant years, met some great people, worked with some really amazing people. And I guess the reason we set the business up when we did, I think there's a few things really. I mean, historically, the sector has moved in cycles, and there hadn't been a new startup for quite some time. And there had been a lot of consolidation in the sector in the sort of 2-3 years leading up to us setting up business. I think the feedback from clients, from consultants, and from others was saying, there's less choice for small independents, and there's sort of a lack of variety in that sort of small boutique caterer space. So we thought we'd do it at that time, and actually we had some really good quick success. Little did we know COVID was around the corner, but perhaps we wouldn't have done it if we'd known. So blessing in disguise in some ways. So yeah, we set up Houston and Hawks in 2019, myself and my business partner, Dave Hall. So Dave, as I say, we met many years ago at Baxter Smith. He stayed with Baxter Story throughout his career and became managing director of their central division. And I then left Bartlett Mitchell in 2019. Houston and Hawks was born at that stage. And I think, we've had 6 years has flown by. We've had 6 pretty interesting, very successful years since, I'd say.
It's almost seemed like to some degree that you kind of for a long time have known that you wanted to start your own company. Was there something that inspired you to do that in your early career or early life, or where did that drive to start something come from?
Yeah, I think so. So I think it is sort of in the blood. I think if you look at across our whole family, predominantly most people have gone on to set their own businesses up, not just in hospitality, but in other sectors as well. So I guess growing up with cousins, with parents, with uncles, aunties, I guess without sort of realizing, we grew up in quite a sort of entrepreneurial environment. I went to a school where sort of resilience and risk taking was really encouraged. So I think, interestingly, if you look at a lot of the friends that I still keep in contact from school, a lot of them set their own businesses up in all sectors, again, with varying degrees of success, but many have. Whereas my wife went through a much more traditional education, and most of her friends have had very successful careers, as has she, but in what you would call perhaps traditional environments, big banks, law firms, whatever it may be, accountants. So I think that sense of resilience and risk, and that ability to take that first step to leave and put some money in a bank and set your own business up. Of course, it was a risk, but it was never a frightening risk. It was a calculated risk. It was something where we thought we'd get a good return, and we thought we would, we'd have some really good success in doing so. It was never a sort of scary moment. I think that appetite for setting up your own business, I think you have or you don't have. I know you people will inspire you along that journey, and Dave and I have been inspired by certainly a few people in the sector throughout our careers. But it is a very entrepreneurial industry. I mean, if you look back over decades, most people who have set their own catering businesses up have had lots of success. They've created great businesses with brilliant reputations, with great clients and people. So there's very, very few examples where that hasn't been the case. It's a brilliant sector for people who want to be entrepreneurial. And we've seen that recently over the last couple of years with quite a lot of startups. There's space for everyone, particularly in the sort of smaller boutique sector. It's a massive industry, and you can create a large, successful business with only a tiny slither of that sector. So yeah, I think that appetite for doing it is quite an interesting one. I think it is in the blood to some extent.
Also, I would also imagine that having worked in the industry for more than a decade prior to founding it, that was also something that you were like, I want to do that differently. That's like my license plate. That's my vision. What do you kind of want to? Where do you want to differentiate? What is the vision to create with Houston and Hawks that you maybe couldn't see the other providers in the market deliver fully?
It's a good question. I'm slightly sort of above the trend perhaps sometimes with my thoughts on this, because I do think every company has something to offer. And I do think every company has their own suite of initiatives and their ideas that are unique, and everyone has their own sort of slant on supply chain and whatever it may be, their employee proposition. I think so much of it comes back to people. Almost all of it comes back to people. And I think, one of the things which felt so good about a partnership with myself and Dave is we have complementary skills. There's a real crossover on what I would have sort of call the real fundamentals of, really enjoying the company of others, food, great hospitality, hard work. There's certain sort of personal aspects which cross over. But actually, we're quite different characters. We're quite different people. We get excited about certain things. Our skill sets between perhaps Dave being a bit more operational finance and myself being a little bit more sales and marketing focused are really complementary. So I think in itself, that is actually quite a unique thing, even though it may not sound exciting. I think having founders who share core principles but have complementary skills or complementary strengths is really, really key. So I think the partnership is very good in that. So I think that's a strong point. We are privately funded, which is pretty unique in our sector. We had a lot of offers for investors, particularly at the tail end of COVID. We were never particularly tempted by many offers, but we always wanted to be privately funded, which we remain privately funded. And we wanted to do that for, I guess, lots of ways. But the most important thing is we wanted to have complete control over our business, our business model, the sorts of clients we work with, the decisions we made. And we wanted a framework whereby we can make decisions which was very much focused on what we wanted to achieve in the early years, which was great people, great clients, really good suppliers, never cutting corners, setting really high expectations and standards. And no, I'm not saying you can't do that with an investor. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But we wanted to have complete autonomy and complete control over our our journey. And that in itself is very unique. I think in terms of the operational USPs, B Corp was an important part of that initial journey. We became the only B Corp ranger in the UK. We sort of joke as it being a bit of our lockdown project. When you look at the B Corp framework, a lot of it we were going to do. Some of the stuff we'd never even heard of. So that was interesting to explore and learn more about it. And other things we'd considered doing, but haven't got on with it. So the B Corp framework was almost a bit of a guiding principles tool whereby we could start to build up policies and build what we wanted to achieve as a business within the framework of B Corp. So that really did become a USP very quickly, actually. And then there's through some feedback we got from one of the consultants in the sector saying, everyone talks about people being the USP, everyone talks about their supply chain, everyone talks about food. There may be USPs, but what is genuinely USP? What can you do differently that others haven't got or can't do? Why would customers choose you? And we chose B Corp as that initial sort of journey to go on.
Makes super, super good sense. It would also be great to hear a little bit more about, now, of course, it's been a 6-year journey. What are some of the moments where you feel like, okay, this is really working, we are getting traction? Or can you maybe also tell a little bit more about the size that you've managed to scale to today?
Yeah. Well, I think there was a misconception that you leave your existing employment and then all of a sudden you've got this, 3 clients lined up and all your branding and website done. That definitely was not the case for us. We were both busy until the day we set the business up. So I think the first year, I guess, was about establishing Houston and Hawks supply chain, safety systems, starting to build a USP, the whole sort of why choose us type thing. So we sort of always mapped us. So it was May 2019 we set up. And we always said by the beginning of 2020, we wanted a business which was ready for market, which had good support, good structure. We were beginning to build a good team. And operationally, we were a safe choice for clients. Things happened quicker than we expected. And we won a couple of really nice contracts, probably around sort of late summer 2019. Really by the beginning of 2020, where both of those jobs had gone live, we had probably about 30 team members on the payroll, 2 clients, well over $1 million turnover, and we had 2 proper jobs, proper cafes, really good hospitality, good standards, really good vision for what we wanted to do and change and develop. And that was really, really exciting. Then obviously with COVID, everyone had their own COVID journey. Let's not go over that too much, but effectively for us, it was more a pressing pause for sort of 18 months. Actually for us, 18 months later, we were relatively unscarred. We'd budgeted not to pay ourselves for 3 years. So on a personal level, we'd managed to get through COVID without earning any money. So we were sort of fresh out of blocks. And I think, very quickly in that first year, the story was quite consistent with our clients. It was, we get the occasional requirement for a small event, or the chairman's coming in for a lunch. Could we do a tea, coffee and sandwich lunch for him, or whatever it might be? And bit by bit, very, very quickly, those opportunities grew. And then they started to bring people back into the office and they asked about a cafe, and then all of a sudden it was free and all the rest of it. So it gathered a pace very fast. And if you roll forward now, sort of 4 years, 3.5, 4 years later, we've got about 40 contracts. But, I think all of those contracts have grown quite organically. We say no to about half the opportunities that come our way. We want to win 6 to 8 contracts a year. That's really sort of our business plan. And these things just happen organically. They grow and develop quite organically.
And what do you think are some of the biggest reasons why you have managed to grow to already 40 contracts in 5 years, and maybe even where the first 2 years was very special and quite limited due to COVID and so on? What do you see as some of the reasons for that success? Of course, you mentioned the B Corp and some of the people initiatives, but anything else that you're like, okay, that's really something that one of the reasons why we're really being picked up by clients?
I think there's lots of things. I think being an independent business and a privately funded independent business has been a big part of that success. Dave and I own and run the business, which again is quite unique. I think we have a really, really good team. Our senior team is, I think, amazing. We've got some really talented people, and we've really invested in that team. We've got head of supply, head of ESG and safety. We've got head of marketing. We've got a really strong finance director. We've got 6 really good operational leaders with our ops team and things like that. So we have a really strong senior team. I do think that support mechanism at head office level, call it what you like, but at a sort of central level, I think is very, very strong. I do think that's quite unique. So going back to the point about people, I think we've got a very, very strong team. And then they, particularly the ops team, they're able then to make really good judgment calls on the people they employ, the time they spend with their clients. They don't have 20 contracts each. They have, some have 5, some have up to 8 or 9. But that low ops to contract ratio is really, really important, because you achieve a really good customer relationship through spending time with them, through understanding their business, through knowing their teams, their people, the challenges, the opportunities. And if you've got 25 contracts to look after, that becomes quite difficult. So I think that approach has been a huge advantage for us. You've got to be close to your customers. You've really got to understand your customers, and they've got to feel like you've got time for them when they need them, not when you want to give them time. It's about when they need them. And they need the capacity to be able to make change, and make change quickly. Might be something really simple, but it might be something really complicated. They need that time and the space to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah, no, I think it makes super, super good sense. I think something that could also be interesting is, do you have any like war stories or anywhere where you're like in the early days where you're like, okay, now, yeah, it could be when COVID hit, it could also be another where you lost your first contract, or someone where you're like, wow, okay, are we sure are we doing the right things here? What any point where you like faced a big challenge or something in the early days?
Well, what I would say is when we set up, 2 things. Number one, the industry support was pretty phenomenal. Actually, more so from the senior people in various firms. Great to see you've made the step. Congratulations. Anything we can support with your work. Really quite genuine from most people in the sector, which was really refreshing. But I think what also was really amazing is the amount of support we got from people who may have left companies, they may have worked with us in the past, they may have gone on to do their own thing. And there was this sort of inflood of people saying, look, if you ever need some help, let me know. So we definitely did some begging and borrowing and stealing in the early days. There's no doubt about it. And I'll never forget our first contract at a small American law firm. Well, not particularly small, actually. It was an American law firm. And we'd done a pitch, we'd done a proposal, we'd done a presentation. We got quite far down the track in what was a full-blown competitive process. And we sort of got the nod that we were selected. And then the client said, oh, but our partner wants to come out and see one of your locations. And we said at the time, well, fine well, we haven't got any business and we haven't got any locations. So, what's your thoughts? And he said, look, we've got to find something to, demonstrate. We've got to show the partner what you're about. And your food styles. We approached one of our suppliers who has a big office in London. We took over their training room. We brought in a coffee bar and our coffee supplier. We built a big IKEA butcher's block and covered it with nice salads, and we made some great deli sandwiches, and we set up a little hospitality area, and we put our team in branded uniform, and we set this supplier room up as a staff restaurant, not pretending it was anything other than a food demonstration. We weren't trying to convince his partner it was one of our staff restaurants. She turned up and we went through it all, and we shook hands there and then, and that was our first contract. And it was it was great. But you think about now, if you want to show a proposed client one of your operations, you pick up the phone, you ask your client, you get it in a diary, and a couple of days later you've done a site visit and a tour. You take for granted those sort of some of the challenges you faced along the way. It does force you to be very creative. You think differently, pull on all the resources that you've built up over time. And as I say, it's amazing how many people want to support that initiative. Clients, teams, suppliers. Suppliers is another thing. Even an old colleague of ours from a previous employment, we sort of when we said we were leaving and we were setting up our own, he said, "Look, one of your biggest challenges is going to be get credit from your supply chain. Don't take for granted 30-day terms." And although we valued that advice, it was quite the opposite. We were approached by a number of suppliers who we'd worked with over the course of, 15, 20 years throughout our careers, saying, we want to be part of your journey. We anything we can help with. Everything from giving us office space to training centers to credit to whatever it might be. But that didn't cross our mind when we left, thinking we might not be able to get credit from suppliers. It didn't even cross our mind. But yeah, you need that support and the help along the way. Yeah, as you say, it's incredible how that comes out of woodwork. It pleasantly surprised.
It's also one of the things that I've been really, really positively surprised about when we started. Also, actually, back in 19, we launched in January 2020, so quite similar to you. It was also like how friendly also really, really senior leaders in both the industry, but also from our point, also in other tech industries and so on is. It's really, really phenomenal. And I think something that I hear from many business founders that it's really a positive surprise.
That's what makes it a good industry. It really does. I think genuinely there is a desire to see the industry succeed. And although it's highly competitive, a lot of us are very good friends at work. And a lot of us spend a lot of time with each other. I think there is a genuine desire to see people succeed in whatever they're doing. So, that's what makes this industry pretty unique and really special.
Yeah, and talking about special and people, one of the things that I think people is one of the words we've mentioned the most time in this talk, and of course a super important and crucial part of this whole industry and what really makes it all work. You have also been named with Houston Hawks as one of the best places to work in hospitality for now 3 years running. Also curious on what you have been your thinking and how have you designed your process and structures regarding people to accomplish that, like acknowledgement and success, and what are you doing to attract and retain the great talent? Because at the end of the day, if you are a client, one of the most important thing is who are the person that comes in and makes my food, who is the person I talk with when I need to make change management, etc. So people really fuels it all. But
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I think starting at your last point, so in terms of attracting and retaining good people, I think you will attract and retain really good people if you are a really good business. So our initial driver isn't how do we attract and retain good people. Our initial driver is how do we create a really good business that creates great opportunity and rewards people for their successes. And there is an awful lot that goes into that. I think in the early days, it was really quite easy because Dave and I were, across everything. We were effectively the two ops managers of the business. All of the catering managers initially reported into us. Before David Steele, our director of food, joined, the head chef sort of reported into us as well. You know everything about everyone. And that's very easy to then uh, design the feel and the look and feel of the business. So, of course, as you grow, the people you bring in, the ops managers, the development chefs, whoever it may be, the head office support team and things, you need to employ really good people to maintain that approach and that structure, and they need to be culturally aligned to us and what we're trying to create as a business. So I think that's really important, selecting the right senior people along the way, because as I referred to earlier, if you get a really good ops manager who shares the values that you perceive to be important, they're probably going to attract good managers who share those values, and that cascades down through the team. So I think employing the right people who are on your journey is really, really important. I think allowing people to have a voice is also really key. And also the impact that voice has on policy and procedures and benefits and whatever that might be is also really important, which is actually why we do that survey with the caterer every year. It's a survey which goes to every individual across the business. It's filled out by them. We get really good reporting and data from that survey. And every year we pull together that feedback, a few months after, we create a consolidated summary in something which is really impactful, eye-catching, really simple, A4 poster style. And we take maybe the top 6 initiatives that people have suggested and we implement them in the business. So we've overhauled our policies around paternity and adoption. We've introduced reward schemes. We've introduced additional benefit schemes. We've introduced various communication tools, all sorts of things. And it's all off the back of that survey. So I think if people are going to take the time to complete the survey, we need to take the time to digest that information and critically create some good actions out the back of it and communicate that across the teams. Pretty much all of the people initiatives we've introduced over the last 6 years have come from the business, the wider team. And I think that's really awesome.
Also, if we're looking a little bit also both back, but and also ahead, like what do you think has been some of the most rewarding part of building the business? But also maybe if you are now we are 6 year into the journey approximately, how do you imagine that going forward? Where do you see Houston Hawks heading in the next 5 to 10 years, for instance?
Okay, so the next 5 years is quite interesting. Every year we do a sort of senior team away day for a couple of days in a nice hotel where we can sort of part celebrate success and part plan for the future. So we've actually got that upcoming sort of tail end of November. We've just finished the agenda for that, funny enough, and it is pretty much all about looking at what makes us a great business. There's sort of 4 or 5 sessions. It's understanding as a team what makes us a good business and why. Looking at how we can maintain those things as we grow and what gaps and resources we may need to look at along that journey, and then what additional things we can do in addition to what we're doing now. So I think it's actually taking the time to figure out what's worked really well so far, because look, as the business grows, as it has in the last 6 years, there'll be dips and there'll be peaks and there'll be things which used to feel easy and now they don't. So there'll be things which we take for granted along the way. So it's just taking the time to reflect on what that is. So I think, but the big part of all of that is about culture. It's about how do we maintain a business that really puts people front and center. How do we maintain a sort of high trust culture within the senior team? And how does that filter back through the business to everyone throughout, from a barista at one of our small sites in central London to a general manager at one of our larger sites in Bristol? How do we maintain that sort of small company feel whilst we grow? And that's our sort of next phase of our discussions in the next few weeks, because I think we have some ideas on how to do that. We've got 12 people in the senior team and they're all very, very talented in their own sector. Now they have all their own views of how the operational team will achieve that, how the finance team, how the marketing team will achieve that. In sort of gathering our thoughts and reflecting on what's great now and how can we maintain that as we continue our journey.
Do you have any bold goals or maybe even end desires? It could be anything from we want to be the largest independent in the UK, or we want to go international, or we maybe want to exit at some point to another organization. Or do you have any end goals for the journey or where you want to achieve with Houston Hawks?
The short answer is no. Maybe we should have some big goals, but we don't actually. We set ourselves an annual plan every year, which the senior team sort of sign off and buy into. So we're always sort of a year ahead, I guess, in terms of where we're heading. But no, we don't. No, we don't. I think in some ways our priority is, as we grow, doing the basics really well. And if we do the basics really well, we will grow and continue to grow as a really good business. And in some ways, our big goal is to really keep the business simple. Why I think we do a good job is because we simplify the business as much as we possibly can. We limit internal reporting to an absolute, must. We do very, very little internal reporting. We don't have investors or banks to try and satisfy in terms of business plans and multiples of our business and what an exit plan might look like. We don't have those pressures. So we just keep it as simple as we possibly can. And I think, there's no reason why that can't be really successful. And that's our big goal, because it sounds easier than it is. As we grow, and more policy needs to be introduced and things, keeping it simple will probably be our biggest challenge. So let's call that our biggest goal.
Yeah, I think it's actually quite alike with software. Like building simple software is actually a lot harder than building complex software with hundreds of buttons everywhere and so on, because that simplicity is in many ways a complex thing to achieve. So I think it makes great sense. Actually, here to end the call, Simon, we would love to do a little quick fire. I'll ask a few questions, and just if you can provide some relatively quick responses, and then we'll go through a few. One is, you mentioned in the beginning that you were one of the few people in the university that actually knew about this sector. I think branding of the sector has been a discussion in many forums I have been at, contract catering, food service, whatever you want to call it. How can we make that more attractive? And how do you think we can improve the branding of our industry?
Oh, I think we've done a good job of it over the last 10 years. Bringing people in through apprenticeship programs has been a good vehicle. The profile the sector has built with certain universities and education things has been really good. I think it's a very difficult question, and we've been talking about it for 30 years, but the food standards are getting better and better and better. Coffee and tea quality is getting better and better and better. And bit by bit, the reputation is turning from what used to be staff canteens into, really good staff restaurants, hospitality. The food we do across the sector compared to 20 years ago is chalk and cheese. And we're attracting great restaurant and hotel chefs into our industry, which, they see the benefits in many cases of working in the food service sector as opposed to the 5-star hotels and restaurants of this world.
Makes sense. If you were to give advice to some people who are in their earlier careers in contract catering, either in Hughes and Hawks or in someone else, what is your advice to them if they want to progress fast, they want to make an impact in the industry?
I think you've got to really throw yourself into it. See every bit of the business from finance, supply chain, kitchen, management, a lot. I think really throw yourself into it. And I think when opportunities do arise, take them. I look back at my time in Europe, and although it was a decision I made. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a wife at the time. It was an easy decision to spend a year in Europe, and that was probably, as I look back, most challenging but rewarding year of my career, I would have thought. So I think you've got to just throw yourself into every opportunity that comes your way.
What is a thing about your weekly routine that potentially could inspire others? I can give an example from mine. I try to spend 50% of my time with clients, either existing clients, new clients, things like this. Is there anything about your weekly routine? It could also be your morning ritual or anything that you think could potentially inspire others.
Well, I don't work at home. That's my routine. If I need to do work, I'll finish it at the office. I'll finish it wherever I may be working, and then I go home. And I've only introduced that routine in the last couple of years because I find you've got to be able to divide work at home to be successful in whatever role you're doing. I think you've got to have that division. Working at home is fine if you're able to achieve that division in another way. But for me, getting home is being home, and that's made a big difference actually to my work and personal life over the last couple of years.
Last two questions before we end up the call is, what elements or trends do you see being more important in contract catering if we look 2, 3, 4 years ahead?
I think well-being and well-tech is an important development. I think there's a lot in that space which is quite interesting. One obviously we've talked about in the past. I think the simplification of tech is really key. Having a seamless tech experience. I think tech is really important in certain locations. But what I have seen is really critical. That's seamless, it's simple, it's designed with the user experience at its forefront. I think the simplification of that journey is really, really key. I do think the simplification of business generally is a really important trend everyone's doing. even the very large companies are going back to basics of food, people, finance, looking after their customers. So I think I would say that they're important trends as we move forward. Look, that's underpinned by the stuff which I think is always important: relationships, great supply chain, focusing on your people, focusing on your customers. They're sort of prerequisites. That's hospitality. That has to be done. But I think the wellness, technology, and that sort of focus on simplification, I think they're really important aspects.
Really nice. Then the last one is, if you were to start Houston and Hawks from scratch again, is there anything or something you would do differently?
Oh, that's a really good question. No, I don't think there would be. I think it's a boring answer, but I think we've had a really good journey. We've had some great people join us along the way, and I actually wouldn't change the timing. I wouldn't change the timing. As I say, in a weird way, the pandemic allowed us time to think about the future more than we perhaps did. I think it allowed us to really consolidate our thoughts into what's really important. And we spent more time thinking about how we could be different within a sector than we did when we first set up. So COVID gave us that opportunity to pause, which we had a sort of second attempt at setting up the business. I think we made the right decisions in the early days, investing in food. David Steele, our chef director, has been an enormous part of our success. We're a food business at the end of the day, and we wanted to really invest in someone who'd been there and done it, who'd got a great network, who'd created opportunities along the way for lots of others, and that's really manifested itself into the business we are today. I think we've got some great chefs, great people, some brilliant brilliant people working in our kitchens and things. And I think, that was definitely the right thing to do, investing in that sort of food first approach when we set up.
I think it also kind of like greatly represent that you also are your journey. I'm also thinking about that sometimes, that like the journey that we have had is also what have led us to where we are today. And for instance, the fact that we didn't come from the industry but came a little bit from the outside also made us be a lot curious, like talk with hundreds of chefs, go out and be curious in how everything is gone and not having a lot of assumptions about everything before we start. So I think it's really also greatly represent like the fact that you had that extra time to reflect during COVID have also affected your journey as a contract caterer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think looking at the sector with some sort of fresh eyes is important, and I think that's something we try and do quite often. I think as the business has grown, I think Dave and I have been able to step back a little bit from some of the really fine details. And so from time to time, actually, the hardest thing is to look at your own business without being too biased about what you're doing, and frankly, getting a little bit defensive about what you're doing. And I think there's various ways we've achieved that. We've got people in the industry we trust and we talk to, and we get their opinion from time to time. We've always tried to create a very open culture within the team, and that sort of high challenge, high support. I think we're both very good at taking on board feedback from people, and then sort of influencing what we do as a business. You're right. Looking at it with fresh eyes every now and then is really, really key. But yeah, so far I think we made a pretty good attempt at that, and I'm sure that'll be an important part of our own development and journey as we move forward in the next sort of 5 years or so.
Sounds exciting. And again, Simon, thanks a lot for taking the time to join us here. It's been a pleasure to dive a little bit deeper into the journey of Houston Hawks, and looking forward to following even more going forward.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening in.